Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is July 10th, 2022, and this is your daily Ukraine update, and we are going to be breaking down just where Russian forces look like they are starting to push now. Let's get into it. So, here is our map, the most recent up-to-date map. What is most interesting is that in the past 3 days or so, we haven't actually seen that much territory, that much offensive work from Russian forces. This lines with what we had heard, that the Russians are engaging in an operational pause. They are refitting, resting their units, but if you are on the offensive in U.S. military doctrine, and Russian doctrine largely agrees, that operational pauses are a huge risk when you are on offense, because the people on defense, the force that you are pushing into, they have time to consolidate, refit, and reorganize. And because they are on the defense, they naturally are going to be able to do so a bit more effectively than you, the force on offense. What does that mean for Russia? Well, it means that it seems like they must really need to, but crucially, they have kept up the pressure in a lot of fronts. So let's take a look at exactly where. The biggest note to me is that, yes, there's been absolutely some continued consolidation along this front line from Lysychansk running south, and that makes a lot of sense. We've talked about this, that Russia's going to have to find a sort of defensive line that aligns with existing territory. You can see this lake, this road, MO3, but there's a lot here that Russia is going to have to look carefully at the terrain and decide what is most defensible, and of course, strategically, operationally significant. But where we've seen significant changes has been in the Bohorodychne area. You can see we fast forward up to today, and we see that after weeks of fighting in Bohorodychne, the Russians have seized the majority of the village. Ukrainian forces remain in position in the south, and as we've seen elsewhere, right, the 80th and 81st, right, there's the 80th right there at Bohorodychne, and the 81st have been holding this area outside Dolna, as you can see, for weeks, really stalling Russian efforts. But I suspect that Russian logistics have finally been able to reposition logistics, or even rear area troops, right? What's called a reserve. Reserve is usually forces that aren't engaged but are kept ready to deploy at a moment's notice to affect a battle that might not be going your way, or a battle where your momentum has stalled and you want to push hard to achieve a decisive victory. When the main effort was on Lysychansk, the reserve probably sat outside Lysychansk, but now that it shifted, reserve forces may have moved to Bohorodychne, possibly augmented Russian forces, and allowed them to push out and seize the entirety of the village. Why is this significant? Well, it represents one of the last bridges that is still able to cross the Siverskyi Donets. And by occupying this, it means that Russian forces can begin to mass south of the river with ease. And this is so crucial because you can see that basically for miles and miles and miles, Russian forces have been kept on the north side of the Siverskyi Donets. Now, with the seizure of this bridgehead right here, they can begin to move forces in earnest and begin to threaten Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. Now, we've discussed that the next focus of Russia is likely to seize territory within the Donetsk province. I suspect that it would involve the completion of the seizure of Donetsk itself, but some Ukrainian analysts do say that Slovyansk and Kramatorsk are also cities that are essential to seize in order to consolidate Russia's eventual vision for the DNR, the Donetsk People's Republic, or Donetsk People's Republic, I think. Some sort of Cyrillic translation that doesn't work. But what is interesting is that, of course, now they've seized Bohorodychne, and kept the Ukrainians on their toes, pushing them back. The question now is, where will they go next? And the answer among analysts, for example, the Institute for the Study of War, that's done an excellent look, is they argue that Russian forces are preparing to annex Donbas, Kharkiv, and southern Ukraine. Well, that doesn't narrow much down, does it? But I maintain that they are going to want to seize Donetsk entirely, right? They're going to want to seize the larger Donbas. I think there is some reports that they are beginning to push along Marinka, so it's possible they may want to extend and control along this area, trying to sort of flank in and around to seize the area surrounding Donetsk, so that they can again have enough standoff to get this airport operational again for military flights. That's possible. It's also possible that Russia simply says, hey, listen, there's 2 major cities left, and we are not done until we have seized them. So their next target may be Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. You could see that despite seizing Lysychansk, there is still a much larger, more open cauldron that similar to the one that we saw when they seized Siverskyi. So that's also possible, that they try to extend out here, right, and try to get Pokrovsk, and then use that as sort of the mouth to swallow up the remaining 2 cities. So again, my analysis, I think it's highly likely based on controlling major axes of advance, strategically valuable infrastructure. I still think you're going to see them push towards Potorovsk, but you may also see them push south from this Bohorodychne, where they've secured their bridgehead. So what this is sometimes called, guys, is setting conditions. Russia has given up in some ways, which in U.S. military doctrine, the initiative. The initiative is the term for you being the one who chooses where and when the fight takes place. So your forces, usually you seize the initiative by being the first mover and by forcing the enemy to react to what you do, not let the enemy come up with their own plans on how to thwart you. So you seize the initiative and you maintain hold of the initiative by always pushing the enemy, always maneuvering, always forcing them to continually update their assessment of what you're doing. You basically try to outrun their command and control. That's the initiative. And the fact that Russia has had to sort of abandon it very briefly, in some ways, reflects the fact that, logistically, they are probably having a tougher time. The deeper they push into unfriendly territory, the harder it's going to be to resupply. That's just a fundamental fact. Ukrainian forces, in contrast, right, the more territory that they get pushed back from, the easier their resupply will be, all other things being equal, simply because they have to go less distance into enemy territory. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see how that plays out. In sort of the macro perspective, I wanted to point out that the economic warfare, for lack of a better term, that Russia has engaged in, namely controlling energy prices, may have some level of there may be some breaks in the clouds. We've seen oil prices dropping. Russia's rhetoric has increased about their, regarding their sort of energy warfare, for lack of a better term. Again, Vladimir Putin has warned that sanctions could lead to possible catastrophic consequences on the global energy market. Well, the price of a barrel of oil is down from 130 to just 100, a significant drop, and we're starting to see it at the pump. So that is extremely helpful. But so Russia is probably going to ratchet up their own fear mongering to sort of try to ensure that there's balance. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. If you want to see me break down some combat videos that are too spicy for YouTube, become a member of the Patreon. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier patrons, and I will see you guys in the next one.